The day the woman from Dallas knelt down in the mud of a cattle ranch she had once called a future parking lot, nobody photographed it. There was no press, no cameras, no one who would later turn it into a headline or a caption. There was only a small girl named Wren, a three-legged dog named Biscuit, and a man named Calhoun Merritt standing 20 feet away with his hands in the pockets of a flannel shirt, watching the woman who had spent 11 weeks trying to take his land slowly learn how to hold still on it. That is where this story ends. But to understand what it means, you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning, as most beginnings do, starts with someone who thought they already knew how everything was going to go. Her name was Sloane Voss. She was 39 years old, a senior acquisitions director at a Dallas-based land development firm called Meridian Capital Group. She had closed 46 deals in 11 years. She had flown into Cedar Falls, Texas, on a Tuesday morning in late September with a paper cup of cortado coffee, a leather portfolio the color of dark tobacco, and the absolute certainty that this particular deal would be number 47 by Friday. The property in question was called the Merritt Parcel, 14,237 acres of hill country land in Mesa Blanca County, running from the highway west to a limestone bluff and south to a creek the locals still called Quail Draw. The parcel had been in the Merritt family since 1891. It sat upstream of Vista Creek Ranch, a 14,000-acre development project that Meridian's chairman, Foster Greer, had been engineering for the better part of 3 years. Vista Creek was going to be the crown jewel of Meridian's portfolio. A master-planned luxury resort community with a private water contract and a projected return of $600 million over 20 years. There was only one problem. All of that water moved through Merritt land first. Sloane did not consider this a real problem. She considered it a scheduling matter. She had spent the first 15 years of her career learning to identify the difference between an obstacle and a delay. And in her experience, a man with a ranch and a mortgage and a school-age daughter almost always fell into the second category. She drove a black Range Rover through Cedar Falls at 8 in the morning and found the town exactly as she had expected it. 2 stoplight intersections, a feed store with hand-painted lettering, a diner called the Dusty Bell whose parking lot held 4 pickup trucks and 1 school bus. She parked outside the county appraisal office and waited for a man named Gerald Pruitt to arrive with his file folders and his cup of gas station coffee. He was late. She did not adjust her expression. On the other end of town, at the corner booth of the Dusty Bell, a man named Calhoun Merritt was cutting a plate of pancakes into smaller pieces for a 6-year-old girl named Wren, who had a brown braid and a gap between her front teeth and a very specific opinion about which parts of the pancake were acceptable to eat with syrup. Calhoun did not look up when the bell above the diner door rang. He did not need to. He recognized the sound of expensive shoes on linoleum. He recognized the particular quality of silence that settles in a room when someone enters who has never been told to wait for a table. He kept cutting the pancake. He heard her voice before he saw her face. It came from the booth 2 rows back, low and deliberate, carrying across the quiet of the diner the way a stone carries across still water. I need you to pull the easement filings on the upstream parcel, everything Meridian has filed in the last 8 months, and call Boyd. Tell him the timeline has moved. Wren looked up. Daddy, that lady talks like she's on speakerphone. Some people use loud to cover small, Calhoun said. He kept his eyes on the plate. Sloane came to the Merritt property that first afternoon unannounced. She drove the gravel road to the main gate, stepped out of the Range Rover in her tailored blazer, and stood at the fence looking at the land with the practiced ease of someone who had stood at many fences before and never lost. She was holding a bottle of wine that had cost her $300 at a shop on the Knox-Henderson Strip in Dallas. She had brought it the way a chess player extends a hand after a match, a gesture that implies the outcome was never really in doubt. Calhoun was on the far side of the pasture on a 1978 John Deere tractor his father had bought the year he graduated high school. He cut the engine. He did not move. Sloane called across the fence. "Is there someone I can speak with about the property line?" Calhoun climbed down. He walked toward her slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because he had been on this land for 38 years, and he had learned that the land itself moved slowly, and there was wisdom in matching its pace. He stopped at the fence. He looked at her. "You're standing on Merritt land," he said. "Ma'am." She placed the wine on the top rail. Sloane Voss, Meridian Capital. She offered the bottle with both hands. "I'd like to have a conversation about your eastern property line." He looked at the bottle, then he looked at her. "Property line's been where it is since 1891, he said. "It hasn't moved." He picked up the bottle and walked back to the tractor. She stood at the fence for several seconds after he had climbed back up and restarted the engine. Her ears went slightly pink. She did not notice. She was already reaching for her phone. That evening in room 11 of the only motel in Cedar Falls. A 12-room building with a vending machine that dispensed peanut butter crackers and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. Sloane opened her laptop and typed the name into the county records database. Merritt Cattle Company, Mesa Blanca County. Acreage, 14,237. Most recent appraised value, $122 million. Sole owner, Calhoun D. Merritt. She stared at that number for longer than she had intended. In Dallas, on the 43rd floor of the Meridian Tower, Foster Greer was having dinner with 2 members of the Texas Water Development Board. The restaurant had a sommelier and a view of the skyline, and a menu that did not list prices. Foster was charming, as he always was when something cost him money. The deal he was arranging that evening, quietly, over the second glass, would redirect the surface flow of Quail Draw through a network of retention and transfer infrastructure that would effectively dry up the creek within 7 years of activation. He had not told Sloane this. She had not asked. The second time Sloane drove out to the Merritt property, she brought nothing. No wine, no portfolio, no assistant. She pulled up to the front gate at 4 in the afternoon and sat in the Range Rover for a full minute before she got out. Calhoun was on the front porch. He had a mug of coffee and a coil of baling wire he was working with his hands. He did not stand up when she approached. He did not gesture her toward a chair. He watched her come up the gravel drive the way a man watches weather, noting it, not fearing it, not yet. She stopped at the base of the porch steps. "I'd like to show you something," she said. She unfolded a sheet of paper and handed it up to him. He took it without putting down the wire. He read it slowly. It was the draft easement language from the Vista Creek Purchase Agreement. Specifically, Section 4, Paragraph 3, a clause that granted Meridian Capital the irrevocable right to redirect surface flow from Quail Draw following close of escrow. Sloane had spent the previous evening reading the document the way her grandmother used to read letters. Slowly, out loud, with a lamp on, taking in each word as though it might mean something different if she gave it enough time. She had signed page 41 3 months ago. She had not read page 26 until last night. Calhoun looked up from the paper. "You brought this yourself," he said. "Yes. Why?" She stood on the bottom step. The sun was going flat and orange across the pasture to the west. She said, "Because I signed it, and I didn't understand what I was signing." He handed the paper back to her. He set down his mug. He stood up. "Come on," he said. "I want to show you something." They walked the south pasture in silence, past the windmill, past the pecan grove. His wife Della had planted the spring their daughter was born, past the horse barn, up the behind it, where a single live oak stood on a flat piece of limestone above the creek. He stopped below it. He pointed down. The water was running low in September, but it was still running, clear over pale rock, moving with the particular quiet of something that had always moved and intended to keep moving. "Quail Draw starts on the other side of that bluff," Calhoun said. "Runs 3 miles across this property before it touches anything else. Every acre of Vista Creek Ranch they want to build depends on water that cannot be redirected legally without my name on a document." Sloane looked at the water. She was quiet for a long time. "How long has it been running?" "Since before the state of Texas existed." She crouched at the bank. She put 2 fingers into the water. She looked at them. She did not say anything else. On the way back to the house, they passed the live oak again. There was a piece of gray limestone at its base, low and flat, a name, 2 dates, a clay pot of wildflower seedlings someone had placed there and tended. "Your wife," Sloane said. "It was not a question, Della. 2 years ago." She did not offer sympathy. She did not say the things people say. She looked at the stone for a moment, and then looked away, and the silence she left was the most respectful thing she had offered him since she arrived in Cedar Falls. He noticed. 2 days later, the survey crew crossed the fence. Calhoun saw the first white flag go into his side of the property line at 6:40 in the morning. He was already on the porch. He had been on the porch since 5, the way he had been since Della died, sitting with black coffee, watching the sky go from charcoal to rose behind the live oaks, giving the dark its time before he asked it to leave. He set down the mug. He walked out. He stopped 20 feet from the survey foreman and spoke without raising his voice. "Gentlemen, you're on Merritt land. I'll need you to pull your equipment and step back across that fence." The foreman called Sloane. She arrived in a rented Suburban 25 minutes later, blazer over a silk shell, new boots that had not yet learned the shape of her foot. She walked toward him with the forward lean of someone who had spent a decade walking into rooms and taking them over. "Mr. Merritt, my crew has authorization from Vista Creek cellar. If your fence line is in dispute, that's a matter for the county. We're within our rights to." "Excuse me one moment," Calhoun said. He took out his phone. He dialed. He said, "Sheriff Prudhomme. It's Cal Merritt. I've got 6 people on my land, and when you've got a few minutes, I'd appreciate a deputy." Sheriff Dale Prudhomme arrived in 11 minutes in a county cruiser the color of clay soil. He stepped out, settled his hat, and walked past Sloane Voss directly to Calhoun. "Morning, Mr. Merritt. What are we looking at?" Sloane noted the way the sheriff said his name, like a thing that had weight. Within 15 minutes, the crew had loaded their equipment, pulled their flags, and crossed back onto Vista Creek land. Sloane stood in the dirt in a blazer that suddenly felt like it belonged to a different country than the one she was standing in. She did not get into the car. She walked to the fence. She put both hands on the top rail. After a moment, Calhoun joined her. She said, "The sheriff called you, mister." His grandmother was Della's Sunday school teacher. Calhoun said, "That's how it works out here." She looked out at the pasture. The morning light was running gold across the dry grass. On the porch behind them, Wren appeared in her nightgown and waved. Sloane waved back before she thought about it. That night, a courier arrived at the Merritt house with a sealed accordion folder from a firm in Austin called Marquette and Lyle, attorneys at law. Calhoun carried it up to the loft he had built the year Della died, a room above the horse barn lined with what might look, at a distance, like a rancher's ordinary keepsakes. They were not ordinary. A framed bachelor's degree in agricultural economics from Texas A&M, Dean's List, 1994. A black and white photograph of his great-grandfather receiving a land office deed in 1891. A current hydrology survey, color-coded by Aquifer Zone, with Quail Draw marked at its center in blue. And now, on the work table, a manila folder with a yellow tab. Inside the tab, a scanned internal memo. Date, September 14th, 3 years prior. Parties, Foster Greer, then a senior partner at a Dallas land acquisition firm, and the deputy administrator of the Texas General Land Office. Subject: a contingency plan, to be activated only if the Merritt parcel could not be acquired through private negotiation, to pursue an eminent domain claim on behalf of a public-private water infrastructure consortium. Both signatures. The date stamp, the embossed seal of the deputy administrator's office. The original had vanished from the state archive 14 months later. Calhoun folded the memo. He looked at the clock on the wall. He said softly, to no one, Della would have burned this whole county down before letting him touch it. Then he picked up the phone and called a woman named Ruth Ochoa. Ruth Ochoa had a 2-room law practice above the hardware store on Pekin Street in Cedar Falls. She had gone to UT Law on a scholarship in 1998, turned down 3 offers from firms in Houston and Austin, and come home to Mesa Blanca County to handle property disputes, water rights, and the occasional probate. She knew every deed in the county. She knew which parcels had liens and which had legends. She knew the land the way you only know something when you have chosen to stay near it. She was the one who had kept the leather binder in the bottom drawer of her file cabinet for 7 years. When Calhoun called her that night, she drove out to the property with it under her arm. They sat on the porch in the quiet. She set the binder on the table between them. She said, "Foster Greer has already filed through a shell entity to claim an adverse easement against the draw. He is not going to ask you again. He is going to try to take it through the courts and through Austin both." Calhoun poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed her one. She said, "There's one more thing. He's holding something over my nephew. Marcus just made associate at a firm in Austin. Greer sits on their advisory board. I can't be your attorney of record on this one, Cal. I'm sorry." He looked at her. He said, "You don't need to be. You came out here to tell me. That's enough." They sat in the dark for a while, listening to the creek. 3 days later, Sloane came back to the Merritt property for the 3rd time. She did not bring anything. She sat down at the kitchen table across from Calhoun and set her hands flat on the wood and said, "If I told you that the deal as written would dry up this creek within 7 years of closing, would you believe me?" He pushed a cup of coffee across the table. "I'd believe you were starting to see it." She sat with that for a moment. She said, "I signed the document. I didn't read the clause. I don't know if that makes me negligent or just wrong, but either way I signed it. And I'm sitting here now." Wren came in from the front room in bare feet with a sugar cookie wrapped in a paper napkin. She held it out to Sloane with both hands. Sloane took it in both hands like it was something that might break. "Thank you, Wren." "You're welcome," Wren said. "It has sprinkles." Sloane looked down at the cookie. Something in her face moved. It was not a change she performed. It was a change that simply happened. After the coffee, Calhoun did something he had not done with another adult in 3 years. He took down a barn jacket from the peg by the door and held it open for her. "Come on," he said. "There's something I want you to see from the top of the ridge." They walked the long way around, past the pecan grove, up to the limestone rise above Quail Draw. From up there you could see the whole southeast quadrant of the ranch. The creek running low but clear. The fence line between Merritt and Vista Creek land stretching east toward the highway. He said, "Della wrote her senior thesis on this watershed. She said the land doesn't belong to the person who holds the deed. She said the deed belongs to the land." She meant it. Sloane looked at the water below them. She said, "My father raised me to believe land was a slow stock, something you held until it appreciated and then traded. Did he believe that? He went broke twice proving it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't think I was taught the right thing." He did not answer. He didn't need to. They walked back to the house in the long light of a Texas afternoon, and when they came around the corner of the barn, Wren was brushing the old paint horse's flank with both hands, talking to it in a low stream of nonsense. Sloane stopped at the fence and watched. Calhoun stopped a step behind her. The distance between them, measured in steps, in years, in the 2 very different lives they had each been living, shortened by something that had no name yet and did not need one. In Dallas, on the 43rd floor, the meeting happened without Sloane. Foster Greer sat at the head of the walnut table with a view of the skyline that had once made her feel she had arrived. He was announcing a compressed timeline, 30 days to close Vista Creek, not 90. He wanted the water transfer application filed with the Texas Water Development Board before, as he put it, any noisy neighbors had time to get litigious. He said Calhoun Merritt was a sentimental man with a child and a dead wife. He said he would sign for the right number. He said if he didn't, there were other ways. When Sloane's deputy called her from the meeting room to report back, she sat in room 11 of the Cedar Falls motel with her phone face down on the bedspread and stared at the water stain on the ceiling for a long time. She thought about the first afternoon in that boardroom 4 years ago when she had been a junior analyst and Foster Greer had said to her, with his hand briefly on her shoulder, The grown-ups are handling it now. She had absorbed it. She had carried it. She had used it herself 8 months ago on a junior analyst whose name she could not currently recall. She had used it 3 days ago, standing in the dirt of Calhoun Merritt's pasture, looking at a man on a tractor. She sat with that for a long time in the quiet of the motel room. Then she picked up her phone and called Ruth Ochoa. She said, "Off the record, what kind of man is Calhoun Merritt?" There was a pause of exactly 4 seconds. Ruth said, "The kind you don't try to fool twice." Sloan hung up. She turned the phone face down. She sat for another hour in the dark, doing something she had not done voluntarily in 11 years. She did nothing. At 1 in the morning, Sloan drove south on Highway 281 with the Dallas skyline going small in the rearview mirror. She did not call her assistant. She did not pack a bag. She drove 3 hours in the dark and pulled up to the gate of the Merritt property at a few minutes past 1. Calhoun was awake. He had been in the tack room repairing the cinch strap on Wren's saddle for the morning ride. He saw headlights through the kitchen window. He walked out. He opened the gate. She stepped out of the car. She left the keys in the ignition. She said, "I'm not here as a buyer, Mr. Merritt." He looked at her for a long second. Then he opened the gate wider. "Then come in, Ms. Voss." Her phone lit up in her hand. She glanced at it. A photograph, a young man in a graduation cap and gown, a law school logo. Below it, 6 words, "Tell your friend Ochoa to stand down, FG." She read it once. She closed her hand around the phone. She did not show it to Calhoun. She did not need to. He saw the change in her face. The way a person's face changes when something they had hoped wasn't real turns out to be. He did not ask. He tipped his head toward the porch. They sat there until the sky went from black to gray, to the particular rose color that only comes in Texas at the end of a night that has asked a lot of you. They drove to Austin on a Monday. Ruth Ochoa's nephew Marcus, now safely employed at Marquette and Lyle in Austin, out of Foster Greer's reach because Calhoun had made 3 phone calls over the weekend that no one had asked him to make, rode separately and arrived first. Theodore Marquette read the Hollis folder without speaking. He had been a property attorney for 31 years. He did not impress easily. He read the memo twice. He set it down on the blotter with the careful precision of a man handling something he intends to use exactly once, correctly. "Calhoun," he said. "This is enough." He looked at Sloan. "If you file voluntarily as a cooperating witness and provide internal Meridian communications as supporting evidence, we file tomorrow morning." Sloan looked at the bookshelf behind Theodore's head. She did not look away from it. "Tomorrow morning," she said. That night they took separate rooms on the 8th floor of a hotel 2 blocks off Congress Avenue. At 10 o'clock, Calhoun knocked on the door of room 812. When Sloan opened it, he was holding a glass quart bottle of water, green glass, hand-corked, condensation on the outside. "Helps you sleep," he said. Della swore by it. She took it in both hands. She said, "Why are you doing this with me? You could have done it without me." He thought about it. "Because you turned around," he said. "Most people don't." He closed the door. She stood in the middle of the room with the bottle in both hands for nearly a full minute. Then she poured a glass. She drank it slowly. She lay down on the comforter, fully dressed, and she did not open her laptop and she did not check her messages, and she slept for the first time in 4 nights. In Dallas, Foster Greer's phone was going to voicemail on the 5th ring. The Travis County Civil District Court clerk's office opened at 9. Theodore Marquette was first through the door. He filed 3 documents simultaneously: a civil complaint on behalf of Calhoun D. Merritt and the Merritt Cattle Company against Meridian Capital Group, its chairman Foster Greer individually, and 16 named co-defendants, alleging conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted abuse of eminent domain proceedings, and willful violation of Texas surface and groundwater law. A sworn affidavit from Sloan Voss as cooperating witness, and a sealed packet of internal Meridian communications proving that Foster Greer had personally authored the diversion clause, knowing its 7-year consequence. The filings were public by 10. By noon, the Dallas business press had it. By 2 in the afternoon, Meridian Capital had lost 38% of its market capitalization. The board convened at 3. They voted 6-1 to remove Foster Greer effective immediately. He cast the dissenting vote himself. By 4, the Dallas field office of the FBI had opened formal fraud and conspiracy investigation. Calhoun and Sloan walked out of the courthouse at 4:15 into the angled gold light of a Texas October afternoon. They crossed Congress Avenue. They walked 4 blocks to a coffee shop with a tin ceiling and windows that caught the light well. They sat at a small table. He placed his hand flat on the wood. She placed her hand 4 inches away. Neither hand moved. She said, "What happens to you now?" "Same thing as before," he said. "I go back to the land." She looked out at the street. She said, "The board called this morning. They want to offer me the interim chairman's seat. Clean up what Greer built. What do you want to do?" She was quiet for a moment. "I keep asking myself whether I want to spend 10 years undoing what he made, or whether I want to do something I haven't done yet." He did not ask what that something was. He did not need to. Sloan stayed in the cedar cabin behind the main house for 2 weeks. The cabin was small, 1 room, a wood stove, a tin roof. Eleanor's sister had painted green the year Della died. A porch with 2 cane-bottom chairs facing east, where the light came in first. She bought jeans at the feed store. She wore the boots Calhoun had set by the door her second morning, quietly, without comment. They had real mud on them by the end of the first week. On a Thursday, Wren decided to teach her how to tie a proper halter knot, the kind that holds a rope to a fence post but pulls free with 1 tug. 2 loops, Wren said, through the back, like this. "That's not a city knot, that's a real knot." Sloan laughed, a clear, open sound she did not remember making before. Her head tipped back against the porch post. Inside, through the kitchen window, Calhoun was watching with his coffee, and he did not look away. She formally declined the board's offer on the 2nd Monday. In its place, she announced the founding of the Voss Land Trust, a nonprofit conservation foundation chartered under Texas law, dedicated to protecting family-held ranch land from corporate acquisition and watershed-draining development. Initial capital, $38 million, drawn from her whistleblower settlement, her personal savings, and the sale of a Dallas penthouse she had stopped recognizing as home somewhere around the 3rd week of October. The grand jury indicted Foster Greer on the 21st of the month. He was remanded to house confinement pending trial. The Vistas Creek shell entity collapsed inside a week. Ruth Ochoa was called as a witness. She answered questions in short, plain sentences. When she stepped down from the stand, Calhoun was waiting in the hallway. He nodded at her. She put a hand on his arm. She said, "Della would have been proud of you, Cal. You know that." He could not get any words out. He nodded again. On a Friday evening, Marisol, Ruth's paralegal, and the person who had kept the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, locked for 7 years, came out to the Merritt property with a folded sheet of cream stationery she had found behind the deed history. Della's handwriting. It said, among other things, "If I'm not there, Cal finds someone who can stand on this land without trying to own it." He read it twice. He folded it carefully. He put it in the pocket of his flannel shirt. He walked out onto the porch. Sloan was on the top step with Wren beside her, both of them tilted back, Wren pointing out the first stars of December. He did not speak. He stood at the door for a long moment. Then he stepped down to meet them. By the first week of December, Vista Creek Ranch had been acquired by the Voss Land Trust for $84 million. Well below the price Foster Greer had once chased, but enough to satisfy the assessor and the lender. The land was placed under a perpetual conservation easement. Quail Draw received state-level protective designation. No diversion would ever be drilled. The Austin water contract was reassigned to a coastal desalination project, where it should have gone from the beginning. Sloan moved out of the cedar cabin and into a small rented house on the south end of Cedar Falls. Close to the Merritt property, but not on it. The house had a yellow door and a porch that faced east. She was not ready yet for what lay between the cabin and the main house. Calhoun understood. He did not ask. When she came over on Wednesday evenings, he set a 3rd plate. A few days before Christmas, Calhoun walked the fence line between Merritt and Vista Creek land, with a coil of new wire over one shoulder and a post driver in his hand. The sky was the high, cold blue that only appears in Texas in December, clear all the way to the edge of things. It was the same stretch of fence where Sloane had stood in September, in city heels and a tailored blazer, and called his pasture a future parking lot. She came down the dirt road in her boots, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the Dusty Bell. She handed him one. They worked without speaking for nearly an hour. She held the wire taut while he drove the posts deeper into the caliche. Her hands had small calluses now on the fleshy part of her thumbs, from the work of the last several weeks. When the last post was set, they straightened up together and looked west across the pasture, toward the rise where Quail Draw ran cold and clear and older than the state of Texas. She said, "Wade," and then stopped herself. She said, "Calhoun, I don't know what this is yet." He set the post driver down. He looked at her for a long moment. "Land doesn't rush," he said. "It doesn't have to be anything yet." She nodded once. She did not look away. Then a small thudding of boots came up the road behind them. Wren leading the old paint horse by the halter, braids swinging, cheeks bright from the cold. She walked straight between them. She slipped her right hand into Sloane's left. She slipped her left hand into Calhoun's right. She turned the 3 of them gently to face the creek. The water was moving. It had always been moving. It would keep moving long after the fence and the wire and whatever names anyone wrote on any deed. Calhoun felt his daughter's small fingers tight in his own. He felt, on Ivy's other side, he felt the woman who had driven down from Dallas in September with a bottle of wine and 11 years of certainty, now standing with him in December boots and a borrowed work coat, looking at the same water he had always looked at. He did not let go, neither did she. Some fences mark where land ends, others mark where it begins. The story you just heard is a work of fiction. The characters, the properties, the legal proceedings, and the institutions depicted are entirely invented for narrative purposes. No real individuals, companies, or geographic locations have been portrayed, and any similarity to actual persons or events is coincidental. The legal processes described, while grounded in the general logic of Texas water law and civil litigation, are not a substitute for qualified legal counsel. There is something this story kept turning over that I want to sit with for a moment. We talk a lot, in the language of ambition, about the difference between people who take and people who give. But the more interesting distinction, the one most people never think to make, is between people who turn around and people who don't. Sloane Voss had spent 11 years getting very good at not turning around. And to be fair to her, the world she worked in rewarded that. It rewarded speed over sight, closure over conscience. It gave her a title and a view from the 43rd floor, and a signature that meant things happened. What it could not give her, what no deal in any portfolio ever gives, is what she found standing at a fence in Cedar Falls with mud on her boots and coffee she did not pour herself. Calhoun Merritt is not a saint. He is not a symbol. He is a man who inherited land and chose to understand it. And when a woman drove up to his gate in the middle of the night and said she wasn't there as a buyer anymore, he opened the gate wider. Not because it was safe, because it was right. I think about that a lot. About what it costs to open the gate wider when someone has been on the other side of it. About how the hardest thing to offer someone who has spent years moving fast is permission to be still. The water in Quail Draw does not know who owns the deed above it. It moves because that is what water does. It does not wait to be useful. It does not negotiate its own survival. Some things in this life are like that. The people who understand them, who stand beside them without trying to redirect them for profit, are rarer than they should be. This story is for them. And for anyone who has ever, at the end of something, turned around.